We are about to have a new player in the gaming space. Now, Netflix have dabbled in games. They worked with Telltale on one or two things in the past, but they recently announced they were getting a bit more serious about it, and now we've actually seen an acquisition. Yes, now a lot of people are thinking, developers being purchased by a big tech company. Well, we saw that happen to Typhoon Studios with Google Stadia, and look where that went. Well, let's get into this and try to make some sense of what Netflix are doing and what this could actually mean. So, Netflix are ramping up their ambitions with the acquisition of Night School Studio. Night School are a Cali-based developer. They are behind, I think their most known game would be Oxenfree, which did fantastically well, and they have been acquired by Netflix. Now, they were founded in 2014. They pretty much have a reputation for well-written narrative games. That is what they do. 2016's Oxenfree did incredibly well. And then, of course, they did a Mr. Robot game, which I really should check out because I never really got onto that. Then they came out with Afterparty, a fun one, a game about college grads trying to beat Satan in a drinking game. I think that's a pretty neat idea. And then they had Next Stop Nowhere, which is an Apple Arcade space adventure. Now, currently, they're working on the sequel to Oxenfree, which is actually due out next year on the PS4, 5, Switch, and PC. And they've been purchased by Netflix. It's pretty interesting. So, their founder said that this will let them stretch their narrative and design aspirations across distinctive original games with heart, which, I mean, of course, they would say. I'm also saying that basically their explorations in narrative gameplay and Netflix's track record of actually supporting diverse storytellers are a natural pairing, and that it just seems natural. Now, that is an interesting thing. Netflix, they're known to be like a bit cutthroat of when they decide to, cancel something after the third season when it isn't really as good for like user acquisition. But in fairness, Netflix, I mean, sometimes it seems like a lot of the time why some of the Netflix originals get a little bit, pretty critically, in trouble, is because Netflix ends up being quite hands-off and just being like, all right, do your thing, go make us content, which I think a lot of people working in creative fields do appreciate. And of course, Netflix have also came out with some great stuff. Now, the thing that we then think of, though, is, okay, well, what does this mean for us? What does Netflix moving into the gaming space actually mean for people who like games? Because, I mean, Netflix moving into the streaming space certainly meant a lot for people who like television shows, didn't it? Well, this is all part of their expansion into games. The actual scope of this was unclear at the time. Of course, there was a few Stranger Things games kicking around. There was the Black Mirror Bandersnatch episode as well. That was really the extent of it. There's a few mobile games that are currently being tested in certain territories by insiders right now. And a lot of that is stuff that's based on, like, shows and movies. But this is now acquiring a full studio. And I think that does make things a lot more interesting, because we then have got to ask ourselves, is this Netflix wanting to make tie-in games to the things that they've got the rights for? Or is this Netflix trying to get into the video games game? Developing unique video games, right? So, I mean, it's interesting. I think if it is a lot of tie-in stuff, then a lot of us will be a lot less interested in that. But if it is just them acquiring developers, giving them the funding and the resources to make cool shit that feels new and unique, then that would be good for us. It's just right now, we don't really know what the strategy is. I mean, we don't even know what their distribution strategy is. You would think it would make a lot of sense to distribute via Netflix, that app that everybody has. Now, of course, Netflix, the app, you're not going to be running gameplay on that. If that was to happen, it would be streaming, but we haven't really heard much of that, have we? So it's an interesting little situation there. Of course, some of the other things that Netflix have done have, just been on phones, right? So it's a Netflix thing, but it's not exactly something you access on a Netflix app, if you know what I mean. So there's a lot of thoughts there, especially as we contrast to, say, the likes of Google Stadia. Now, as for why Night School, well, that's because they've actually had a bit of a past with Netflix. There's the Mr. Robot tie-in. Of course, that's not a Netflix thing, but it is a TV show. Night School, though, were reportedly collaborating on a Stranger Things game with Telltale before Telltale closed down. And that was apparently going to bridge the gap between the second and third season of that show. Now, this is a project that was not announced or officially cancelled or anything, kind of just disappeared following Telltale's collapse. So who knows what's going on there, but it could show that there was a good relationship at one point. Though, of course, that would be Night School actually working on Netflix-branded content, which to some of us, we might think, oh, a good Stranger Things game by a really good studio. I mean, cool. I like Stranger Things. Loads of you probably like it too. That would be nice. But perhaps as people who like games, we'd be wanting something a little bit more games first, rather than games sort of playing second fiddle to the other thing and essentially being a sort of a tie-in project to expand a franchise. Of course, though, this is a big tech company coming in, right? Now, I would say that when it comes to respecting creativity, Netflix certainly get more of a pass than Google. Right? So really, just to end the news part of this video, that's essentially it. There's a lot of spook because, well, Stadia's not worked out that well, really, for anyone, has it? I mean, some developers basically signed a sheet of paper and got a bunch of money for free. But other than that, I mean, look what happened with Typhoon Studios. People don't want that to happen to Night School. We then also think of Amazon Luna, like their streaming service for games. I forgot that existed.
So did I.
I mean, I logically knew, but it's not been a part of the gaming experience of anyone I know at all. So with that said, what do you think? What do you think?
So just a little bit of clarification. So actually Bloomberg covered in the past, when was this? This was earlier this year. They covered the move, and they had someone familiar with the situation say they do plan to offer it as a part of the streaming platform.
Oh, okay.
So it is part of the streaming platform, not going to charge extra for that content, rolling it in as a kind of, here's a bonus, your Netflix sub. So almost kind of the mirror of if Xbox Game Pass started selling movies.
That makes a hell of a lot of sense.
But we have the problem of, will Netflix offer downloads? Because obviously they offer downloads for shows, but that feels a bit different to how streaming works.
Well, yeah, it's just playing a video file versus here's a game, you're going to run it on your... Like, I don't know about you, my smart TV's like a year and a half old, and the thing runs like shit already. Smart TVs are awful, awful contraptions when it comes to how well they'll just run a bit of software.
Yeah.
Which is certainly interesting because, I mean, if it's going to be controlled via remote, and like I don't have it, it's like one of those Philips Ambilight ones. It's like, it's not super expensive, it's not super cheap either, but sometimes like the input lag you get on the controller, just it freezing for 5 seconds, and then all of your inputs get queued and then all execute at once. Like, this is the kind of chaos that people are used to in a smart TV. You then sort of think, well, how does that even mesh with the gaming experience?
Yeah, you have to consider, like, obviously Netflix app can go on anything. So will the Netflix app then restrict the gaming side of things to phones or to consoles or PCs in that front? That's kind of what you sort of expect. One of the interesting things about it all is they have just like this kind of lets you know where they're going with it. This lets you understand who's making the decisions. So, what decisions are that person? What have they made in the past? What are they likely to move into? So they've got Mike Verdu. Is it Mike? Yeah, it's Mike Verdu, who used to be an EA executive producer, I believe. He then went on to work at Facebook. He's actually, I believe Netflix picked him up from Facebook, where he was working on the VR and AR side at Oculus. Gotcha. He also worked as chief creative officer for Zynga back in the day. This is like 2009, 2012, something like that. So you've got the kind of mobile person who's going to be doing that element of things, as opposed to someone who's used to console game development or something like that. So it's likely not going to be super in that sense.
Yeah.
And it's probably going to feel similar to Apple Arcade, I think, based on this acquisition. Because Apple Arcade are going very heavy on the, these aren't really, incredible video games most of the time. It's a lot of the smaller narrative things that you can just sort of, the kind of things anyone would be happy enough to pick up on a phone. That said, Apple Arcade does have games that are like, a little bit more core gamery focused, but not that many of them. Stuff like Fantasian, I think, which is apparently a great RPG. But one of the other things is you're asking whether or not they, is this going to be tie-ins, or is this going to be a new segment of the Netflix market? It seems that based on the 5 games that the 5 mobile games they currently have, it is going to be an additional segment of their market as opposed to just tie-ins, because the 5 games have nothing to do with the shows. Let's see, they're called, oh my goodness. Yeah, so they're called Shooting Hoops, Teeter Up, Card Blast. That's 3 of them. So they have nothing to do with the shows. They're just, no harm to the devs, but they seem like just kind of, here you go, mobile game stuff, which is not, kind of makes on our side of the sort of gaming divide go, who cares? But, I mean, it's obviously when they're picking up things that are like Oxenfree, which is kind of more, it feels more indie, but more traditional indie.
Yeah.
So if that's moving over towards the kind of the mobile phone indie space, it could certainly feel a little bit strange. But obviously we don't know anything about the streaming side of things, but that's the kind of gist that I've been able to find out from having a look around. It just, here's the specifics of why this is going to be bad if they start buying up more traditional studios, I think, and move in that direction. But until they actually announce anything, it's hard to know what they're doing, honestly.
Yeah, totally. So I think then it's... You can see like a few things strategically. I mean, I wonder is Netflix just trying to say, hey, we have all of our originals, we have all of the the stuff that we've licensed, but also we have games now. So maybe trying to compete, just to compete with the others more. Which it is interesting because you would have thought that the people who should have been doing this well, of course, is Amazon.
Yeah.
Because Amazon, they have game streaming. They have original programming. They have Twitch.tv. They've just released New World, and they have developers.
Yeah.
It is kind of funny. I suppose a very different way the Netflix are doing it, though. Versus Amazon's just like, hey, we're going to muscle our way into MMOs. Hey, we're going to get the Lord of the Rings. And, I mean, obviously that fell through for the MMO side. But yeah, interesting. Different markets. It feels a little bit like Amazon knows to target core gamers more. Whereas maybe Netflix are going for more of a just, I don't want to use the word normie, but sure, whatever that.
Yeah.
Like the sort of thing where maybe, if your mum plays a game on her phone and also watches Stranger Things, then the sort of thing that will then appeal.
Yeah.
Or even like if you say, enjoy Mr. Robot, like I was looking at the Mr. Robot game that Night School did. Pretty cool. It's basically essentially, the story of it is you find Darlene's phone, and there you go. It's basically a game that plays out through a fake eCorp text messaging app. The sort of thing that basically anybody could pick up and would be an enhanced sort of show experience, but one that wouldn't really necessitate you being a gamer.
Yeah, that's exactly interesting. I love seeing how the natural steps are for kind of horizontal and vertical expansion. Because obviously Netflix are going to go, well, we've got people who watch Stranger Things, we've got people who watch Mr. Robot, although Mr. Robot's on Prime now. So
it was always on Prime.
Oh, so it was?
It was never Netflix.
Oh, yeah. So that example wouldn't particularly work, but,
Well, just the point of, like, what Night School have done before, and being a kind of, just, like, a pretty natural and in-universe way to tie that into a show. Yeah,
so you can see how that would work for Netflix overall, because they're especially when they've got the fella from some of EA's lesser enjoyed projects, and Zynga. So that kind of approach to it of, okay, how can we get the streaming market to play a couple of little games, and then we can also have access to the burgeoning games market and all the investment there and stuff like that, versus Amazon going, we have Twitch. Should we make a real game? Which feels unfair to say, real game versus what like Oxenfree was, because that was certainly a game. But is that kind of perception is among the audience of
big core game?
Yeah, core game is probably the word that probably more fair to use overall. But I think that's funny to see the distinction and how big, because obviously this is also gaming, but they're very, very different slices of market and very, very different in who they're looking for.
Yeah. So basically, there you go. That's what's going on. We are seeing both Netflix and Amazon moving to games, taking very different approaches. I think for the sorts of things that we may be interested in, probably a bit more Amazon for the actual games. But with a studio like Night School, Netflix could actually end up doing something genuinely interesting. And I'm all for that. Yeah,
that's actually, to end up, that's what I think about Apple Arcade as well. I think Apple Arcade does the premium version of those games in a way where you saw it with what's like a Monument Valley. You saw the potential. you saw the potential for really good experiences that maybe not be entirely for core gamers. You know, you're not going to think, am I going to play New World or Monument Valley tonight? Like, that's not probably going to be any, you know, you'd be a rare person to have that consideration.
Yeah.
But there's valuable quality video games in that market now.
Totally.
Apple Arcade have proven it in a little bit of a way with a couple of their offerings. So hopefully Amazon pick up that instead of going the Facebook gaming route of, you know, the Candy Crush. Yeah, I mean, yeah. Instead of the route of Candy Crushes and those kind of games.
Ugh.
Yep.
Ugh. Yeah. So there we go. Hope we get some cool shit. Let us know what you think. I mean, I'm sure a lot of us end up watching shows that are on Netflix. I mean, you can't avoid that nowadays, can you? So, I mean, let me know what you think. Like, is there a Stranger Things game you'd actually be interested in, or a Squid Game game that you'd be interested in? Let me know, I guess. And we'll see you next time.